During an official ceremony at a United States naval base, surrounded by senior officers, politicians, and military families, Navy SEAL Commander Steve Hills made a quiet but brutal choice. When Jordan Lauren stepped forward, he looked her up and down and refused to shake her hand. To him, she was out of place, no visible rank, no uniform, no status. Just a woman in a plain jacket standing where she didn't belong. The moment passed in seconds, but the humiliation lingered in the air, noticed by everyone and challenged by no one. What no one in that room understood was that Jordan was not there by accident. Behind her calm expression was a past deliberately kept in the shadows, one tied to classified operations, life and death decisions, and a single catastrophic mistake that Steve Hills had buried to protect his own career. A truth that, if exposed, could unravel everything he had built. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The polished marble floor of the Coronado Naval Amphibious Base Auditorium reflected the hard, white geometry of dress whites and polished shoes, a sterile mirror that doubled a sense of scrutiny in the room. Every sound carried the faint scrape of sawdust, the muted clink of metal settling against starched fabric, the low murmur of controlled conversations that never quite rose above regulation volume. The air held the sharp scent of floor wax layered with cologne and restrained adrenaline, the kind that accumulated when rank, reputation, and politics occupied the same confined space. Commander Steve Hills stood at the center of the reception line, like a fixed point around which the room rotated. 55, broad shoulders held rigid by decades of posture drilled into muscle memory. His jaw was set in a permanent angle of authority, the kind that had learned early never to soften. The gold trident above his left pocket caught the overhead lighting with deliberate brilliance. Each ribbon on his chest sat perfectly aligned, not a millimeter out of place, a visual inventory of diplomas, commendations, and stories he told often and selectively. He shook hands in a practiced rhythm. Senator, admiral, defense contractor. Each grip was calibrated, firm enough to assert dominance, brief enough to imply importance elsewhere. His smile appeared on cue and vanished the moment the next guest stepped forward, like a switch flipped by habit rather than warmth. His eyes tracked insignia first, faces second. He catalogued value instinctively. Then the line shifted. Jordan Lauren stepped forward without announcement. No aide preceded her, no rank insignia announced her place. She wore a simple gray blazer, the fabric slightly dulled at the elbows, slacks creased but tired. Her hair was pulled into a tight, functional bun that revealed nothing decorative, nothing inviting. Her shoes were practical. Her posture was straight, not performative, as if alignment were a necessity rather than a display. She extended her hand. Her palm bore calluses in precise locations, pressure points earned, not accidental. Steve's gaze dropped to it for half a second too long. His smile faltered, not enough to be obvious, just enough to crease differently at the corner of his mouth. His eyes lifted, assessed her face, her clothes, the absence of markers he respected. Something hardened behind his stare. He didn't take her hand. Instead, he adjusted his lapel with 2 fingers, smoothing imaginary wrinkles, his attention already sliding past her shoulder. His voice remained low, controlled, but it carried with surgical accuracy. "Staff and custodial services are to use the side entrance," he said. The words measure, clean. "This line is for dignitaries." Jordan's hand stayed suspended for a single, stretched heartbeat. The tendons in her wrist tightened, then eased. She lowered it slowly, deliberately. Her breathing didn't change. No color rose in her cheeks, no protest formed on her lips. Her eyes stayed on him steady, unblinking, a flat, cold steel that gave nothing away. Around them, micro-reactions rippled. A woman in pearls inhaled sharply and pressed her lips together. A junior lieutenant's gaze snapped to the floor, his jaw working once before stilling. Somewhere behind the line, a laugh died mid-exhale. Steve Hills noticed none of it, or chose not to. To him, the room resolved itself into familiar categories: power, irrelevance, utility. Jordan Lauren fell neatly into the second, and he dismissed her with the same reflex he'd used countless times before. He turned his body away, shoulders angling toward the next handshake, already engaging a senator with a broad grin and an offhand comment about budget cuts delivered like an inside joke. Jordan didn't move at first. She stood where she was for a breath longer than necessary, then stepped out of the line without ceremony. Her boots made no sound worth noting as she crossed to a quiet corner near a marble pillar. She set her worn leather bag at her feet and rested her hand on the strap. From there, she watched. Steve Hills took the room easily. He basked in it. His laugh came louder now, looser, fed by affirmation. He straightened imperceptibly as a photographer raised a camera. The future command being celebrated tonight sat on his shoulders already, heavy and intoxicating. Jordan reached into her bag. Her fingers closed around a manila folder, its edges ridgy, its surface marked with a red stripe that didn't belong in public spaces, top secret, SCI. The paper was cool against her skin, her thumb pressed into the crease, knuckle whitening as memories surfaced uninvited, the hiss of static over a headset, heat blooming through concrete walls, a voice on comms that wasn't confident then, wasn't controlled. Applause swelled as Steve moved toward the podium. Jordan didn't join it. Her gaze remained fixed, her breathing shallow and contained. Somewhere deep in her chest, something long compressed held steady, waiting. The file stayed in her hand. The rejection didn't end with the words, it traveled. It moved in subtle fractures through the semicircle of guests nearest the line, an intake of breath that stopped halfway, a glass paused mid-lift, a smile that failed to fully form. A woman in an evening dress pressed her fingers against her clutch a fraction too tightly, the knuckles paling before she relaxed them again. A junior lieutenant shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes fixed on the marble floor as if the reflection there demanded his full attention. No one spoke, no one intervened. The silence did its work on its own. Steve Hills felt none of it. His attention had already moved on, mind sliding forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to never being corrected in public. The dismissal had cost him nothing, no effort, no consequence. If anything, it reinforced a worldview that had served him well for decades. The military, in his mind, was a clean hierarchy. Apex predators and expendable assets, leaders and background no's. He had learned early to identify which was which, and he trusted that instinct absolutely. Tonight, he was the apex. The weight of the room leaned toward him. The promotion long anticipated, carefully maneuvered, hovered just ahead. Tangible. Command of a new Tier 1 task force meant access, discretion, influence. It meant legacy. As a senator stepped forward, Steve's posture opened slightly, chest expanding as if drawing strength from the moment. His laughter came easily now, louder, carrying. Budget cuts, he said with a knowing shake of his head. The phrase delivered like an inside joke meant only for those who mattered. The senator smiled, complicit. Cameras clicked. Behind him, Jordan Lauren remained where she was not supposed to be. She didn't react outwardly to the shift in attention. She didn't stiffen or retreat. She simply stepped out of the reception line with the economy of movement of someone trained never to draw notice. Her path took her toward a marble pillar at the edge of the auditorium, just beyond the densest cluster of bodies. There, she stopped. Her shoulders stayed level. Her breathing remained measured, for out, barely perceptible beneath the fabric of her blazer. She set her bag down at her feet and crouched just enough to open it. Her hand slid inside, fingers bypassing mundane objects without hesitation. She wasn't searching, she knew exactly where it was. The manila folder filled her palm, its edges stiff, its surface unmistakable. The red stripe ran clean and deliberate across the top secret, SCI. Even here, even now, the designation carried weight. Her thumb pressed against the cardboard, grounding herself in its solidity. Across the room, Steve Hills soaked in the applause beginning to build. He accepted it with a slight nod, chin lifting, eyes scanning faces that reflected admiration back at him. The gold trident on his chest caught the light again, flaring briefly. He looked every inch the commander controlled, decorated, untouchable. Jordan watched him. The room blurred at the edges as memory asserted itself without warning. The smell of waxed marble gave way to burning plastic and dust. The low hum of conversation dissolved into radio static, thick, aggressive, cutting in and out. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as she remembered the cadence of that night, the way time had compressed into sharp, brutal fragments. Yemen, a village reduced to shadows and heat signatures, comms overloaded, her voice steady in his ear, calling out inconsistencies in the intel, red flags stacking too fast to ignore. She remembered his response, not the confident baritone he used now, but something higher, rushed, a command issued too quickly. An order pushed through despite warnings, reckless, final. Her fingers curled harder around the folder. The cardboard creased slightly under the pressure. Blood drained from her knuckles, the skin stretching pale and tight. She didn't release it. Applause rose again as Steve turned toward the podium. The sound filled the auditorium, bouncing off polished surfaces, thick and celebratory. He took the steps with practiced ease, one hand brushing the edge of the lectern as if claiming it, his shoulders squared. His face settled into the expression he reserved for history books. Jordan remained still. Her eyes tracked him with precision, cataloging posture, movement, the confidence that had grown in the years since that night. The man she saw now bore little resemblance to the one she remembered over the radio, but the connection was absolute. Her breathing slowed further, almost imperceptible, as she brought the memory back under control. The applause washed over her without touching her. She tightened her grip once more, then steadied it. The folder didn't shake, neither did her hands. Whatever moment was coming, she was ready to see it through. Steve Hills leaned into the microphone as if it were an extension of himself, one hand braced lightly on the lectern, fingers spread with casual ownership. His voice filled the auditorium, amplifying and controlled, calibrated to carry authority without strain. "We serve in the shadows," he said, the words delivered with practiced gravitas, each syllable measured. "We make the hard calls when no one else will. We value honor above all else." The sound system caught every inflection, sending it back multiply, heads tilted upward, spines straightened. A few hands came together almost instinctively, the first clap sharp and isolated before they merged into a rolling wave. Applause swelled, deep and thunderous, echoing off marble and glass. Steve allowed himself a fraction of a second to absorb it, his chest lifted slightly. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. A micro-expression of satisfaction quickly smoothed away. He scanned the room the way he always did, from left to right, from front row to back, taking inventory. Admirals, legislators, contractors, faces that mattered. Faces that reflected him back to himself. His gaze moved easily until it didn't. At the rear of the auditorium, near a marble pillar, Jordan Lauren hadn't moved. She stood exactly where he'd last seen her, shoulders squared, posture neutral. Her face was calm, unreadable, eyes locked on him with a focus that didn't waver. She wasn't watching in awe. She wasn't watching with anger. She was assessing. The sensation prickled at the base of his neck. Annoyance crept in, subtle but sharp. Why was she still here? Steve felt a tightening behind his right eye, a faint tick he suppressed by blinking once, slowly. The presence nagged at him, a dissonant note in an otherwise flawless composition. This was his moment. The room was supposed to be clean, controlled. He didn't like anomalies. Without breaking cadence, he shifted his weight and angled his head just enough to catch the attention of the security detail stationed along the wall. It was a minimal gesture, a fractional tilt of the chin, a brief narrowing of the eyes, enough. To Master At-Arms registered it instantly. They exchanged a glance and began moving, their steps deliberate, hands resting near their belts. Steve continued speaking, the words flowing automatically now, muscle memory carrying him through phrases he'd rehearsed dozens of times. But a part of his attention tracked the MPS approach, the quiet efficiency of their movement restoring his sense of order. The unauthorized civilian would be removed. The room would be pure again. Jordan saw them coming. She didn't shift her stance, her breathing remained steady, barely lifting the fabric at her collarbone. As the MPS closed the distance, she slipped one hand into the inside pocket of her blazer. The motion was unhurried, precise, not defensive, not panicked. She withdrew an object small enough to disappear in her palm. It wasn't an ID, it was a challenge coin, not brass, not polished. The metal was black, matte, heavy enough to suggest density beyond its size. There was no unit crest, no eagle, no trident, just a clean sequence of numbers stamped with clinical precision, and beneath them, a Latin phrase etched deep into the surface, acta non verba. She raised it to chest level and held it there between thumb and forefinger. The overhead lights caught the edge of the coin, a sharp glint cutting through the ambient glow. From the podium, Steve saw it. His voice faltered mid-sentence, just a fraction too long between words. His mouth opened again, but no sound came out. A sudden dryness seized his throat, forcing him to swallow. The applause ebbed, confused by the break in rhythm. His hand tightened on the lectern, the knuckles blanched white against the dark wood. His eyes fixed on the coin, pupils constricting as recognition surged unbidden. The MPS slowed, then stopped entirely, uncertainty rippling through their posture. For a suspended second, the room held its breath. Steve Hills stared at the black metal disc as if it were a live round rolling across the stage. The phrase burned in his mind, deeds, not words, his jaw locked. The microphone picked up the faint scrape of his breath as he drew it in, shallow and controlled, fighting to keep his composure intact. The silence stretched, the two master at arms halted in unison, boots settling a fraction to solely against the marble. Their eyes locked on the object in Jordan Lauren's raised hand. Neither reached for a radio. Neither spoke. The black coin absorbed the overhead light rather than reflecting it, its surface dull and absolute. They didn't need unit markings to understand it. The absence was the point. Ghost status, unlisted, unacknowledged, the kind of credential that never appeared in a personnel system and never existed unless it had to. One of the MPS swallowed, his jaw tightening as his gaze flicked briefly toward the podium, then back to the coin. The chain of command, so clear moments ago, had blurred. Jordan didn't wait for permission. She lowered the coin, slid it back into her pocket, and stepped forward. Her movement was smooth, economical, devoid flourish. She passed between the MPS without breaking stride. One of them shifted his weight, as if considering stopping her, then froze, his fingers curling once into his palm before relaxing again. Her boots struck the marble in a steady cadence. Each step echoed, sharp and isolated, filling the vacuum of sound left by the stalled ceremony. Conversations had died completely. Even the hum of the HVAC seemed distant. Heads turned in slow increments, tracking her progress down the center aisle. No one spoke, no one moved. On the stage, Steve Hills felt the room slip away from him. His hands tightened on the edges of the lectern, fingertips digging into the polished wood until it flexed with a faint, betraying creak. The sound was small, but it landed hard in the silence. His shoulders remained squared, but a thin sheen of moisture gathered along his hairline. A single bead of sweat broke free his temple and traced a deliberate line downward. He leaned closer to the microphone, as if proximity could restore control. "Ma'am," he said, forcing his voice into its familiar register, authority, command presence. The words came out steady, but the muscles along his jaw jumped once before stilling. "You are disrupting a military proceeding." Jordan stopped 10 feet from the stage. She didn't look up at him, she didn't look away. Her chin remained level, eyes fixed forward. Her hands hung at her sides, relaxed, fingers loose. When she spoke, she didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to, it carried anyway. "I'm not here to disrupt, Commander Hills," she said. The tone was clinical, tactical, the kind used over encrypted comms when clarity mattered more than volume. A voice trained to cut through chaos. "I'm here to finish the debriefing from Operation Obsidian." Steve's breath caught. Not enough for anyone to call it a gasp, but enough to interrupt his rhythm. His eyes flicked involuntarily to the Admiral in the front row, then back to Jordan. His lips parted, then pressed together again, a reflexive attempt to seal something already leaking. "You remember Obsidian," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "You remember the date." She paused, just long enough for the weight of it to settle. November 14th, 2018. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Color drained from Steve Hills's face in a rush, as if a switch had been thrown. The warmth vanished, leaving his skin a stark, unhealthy pallor against the white of his uniform. A fine tremor ran through his right hand, the fingers tightening around the lectern until the tendons stood out beneath the skin. His eyes lost their sheen, the confident focus replaced by something raw and exposed. For a heartbeat, the commander of the hour looked like a man standing on the edge of open water, realizing too late how deep it was. The room felt colder. A low murmur rolled through the auditorium, starting in the back rows and bleeding forward in cautious waves. Heads leaned together without fully turning, brows furrowed. The phrase Operation Obsidian passed in half-whispered fragments, repeated without context, stripped of meaning by his very own familiarity. There was no place for it in any unclassified briefing, no reference in any publicly acknowledged deployment. The name existed only in sealed compartments, in vaults, without windows, in memories that had never been committed to open record. In the front row, the Admiral shifted. The movement was subtle, deliberate. His spine straightened, shoulders squaring beneath the weight of his dress blues. His hands, which had been resting loosely on his knees, flattened against the fabric as his attention recalibrated. Eyes sharp and predatory, he stopped watching Steve Hills as the center of gravity and fixed instead on the woman standing 10 feet from the stage. The change did not go unnoticed by those closest to him. Aide-de-camp stilled. A senator's pen paused mid-note. On the stage, Steve Hills felt the room turning against him. He forced a laugh, abrupt and poorly timed, the sound scraping its way out of his chest. It didn't carry, it broke. "Security," he said, pitching his voice louder, sharper, as if volume alone could restore order. "Please remove this delusional woman, she's clearly mentally unstable." The word hung in the air, ugly and imprecise. Jordan didn't flinch. She remained where she was, feet planted, posture unchanged. Only her eyes narrowed slightly, a minute adjustment that sharpened her focus. When she spoke, her voice was still level, still controlled, but something in it hardened an edge honed by years of being ignored until consequences followed. "Unstable," she repeated. Steve's jaw clenched. A muscle jumped near his cheekbone. "Is that what you put in the after-action report?" Jordan continued, each word spaced with intent. "Did you write that the communications officer was unstable and she warned you the intel package was compromised? When she flagged inconsistencies in the ISRF and advised a hold?" A few heads turned towards Steve now. The Admiral's gaze never left Jordan. "Or did you scrub the logs?" she went on, taking a single step closer, boots whispering against the marble, "to conceal the fact that you ordered the breach anyway, that you overrode protocol because you wanted a clean kinetic outcome and a medal to pin on your chest." Steve's fingers curled into fists at his sides, then released, then curled again. His breathing grew shallow, the rise and fall of his chest no longer synchronized with his speech. His eyes darted briefly toward the wings of the stage, as if searching for an exit that hadn't existed when he walked in. Jordan stopped again, well inside the room's collective attention now. "My name is Jordan Lauren," she said. The declaration cut through the murmurs with surgical clarity. "Rank: Chief Warrant Officer 5, JSOC Intelligence Division." The room reacted in visible increments. A quiet intake of breath, a chair shifting. Someone in the second row straightened abruptly, recalculating. CW5 wasn't a rank you reached by accident. It was rare, terminal, and deeply specialized, authority without spectacle. "And I was the voice in your ear that night," she finished. The effect was immediate. The murmurs collapsed into silence, as if air had been pulled from the space. The phrase "voice in your ear" landed with a weight that transcended metaphor. Operators in the audience understood it instantly, the lifeline, the last filter between chaos and command. The unseen presence that guided movement, timing, survival. Steve Hills stood rigid, his face locked into something close to disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The tick near his eye returned, faster now, betraying strain he could no longer mask. The woman he had dismissed as staff, as irrelevant, stood revealed as someone with clearance deeper than most in the room, authority invisible but absolute. The plain blazer, the unadorned presence, it all resolved into intention. The shock rippled outward, silent and total. Steve Hills stepped away from the podium as if pulled by an invisible force, the distance between authority and exposure closing with every stride down the narrow stairs. The microphone crackled once as he left it behind, feedback snapping through the room like a warning shot. His movements were sharp, aggressive, shoulders squared wide, chest forward and old. Familiar posture meant to dominate space and break resistance before words were needed. He stopped directly in front of Jordan. Up close, the disparity he'd intended to explode didn't manifest the way he'd expected. He was taller, broader, his presence heavy with rank and muscle memory. Yet she didn't retreat. She didn't shift her weight back or angle her body defensively. She remained exactly where she was, spine straight, chin level, eyes steady. The contrast unsettled him. "You're lying," he hissed. The words were off mic, meant to be private, but his breath was ragged enough that several nearby officers heard the edges of it anyway. His face hovered inches from hers, a vein pulse visibly along his neck. "That operation is sealed," he continued, teeth clenched. "You speak another word, and you'll be in Leavenworth for treason." The threat hung there, raw and pearly masked, Jordan didn't blink. She drew a slow breath through her nose, and with it came the scent he hadn't bothered to conceal: stale coffee, recycled air, the sour undertone of adrenaline turning acidic. Fear had a smell. She'd learned it years ago. Learned to recognize it long before the eyes admitted it. "It was sealed, Steve," she said. Her voice dropped, almost to a whisper, but it carried cleanly through the dead air, calm, precise. She didn't need volume. The Admiral's head angled slightly, listening. "Until you accepted this new command." Steve's pupils constricted, his jaw locked. "The vetting process reopened, and the files," she continued, each word landing with deliberate spacing. "Full spectrum review, operational integrity, command suitability." She raised the manila folder between them and pressed it lightly against his chest, just below the ribbons. The contact was minimal, almost respectful. The effect was not. "And guess who the reviewing officer is?" she asked. Steve's breath stuttered. His eyes dropped to the folder despite himself, then snapped back out. Too late. The answer was already there. "Me." The word ended whatever resistance he had left. Jordan pulled the folder back and opened it with a practiced motion. The sound of paper shifting echoed unnaturally loud. Inside wasn't a scatter of documents or vague allegations. It was orderly, tabbed, indexed. The first page was visible to those closest to transcript header, time-stamped, source verify. Steve recognized it instantly. His right hand twitched, fingers curling reflexively as if to snatch the evidence away, but he didn't move. Couldn't. A thin tremor ran through his forearm, traveling up into his shoulder before he forced it still. "It's a transcript," Jordan said quietly. She turned a page. "An unauthorized kill order," she continued, "issued outside legal authority, and against explicit intelligence warnings." Steve's lips parted, no sound came out. "3 civilian casualties," she went on, her tone unchanged. "And the death of your lead breacher." The room seemed to contract around them. A few officers shifted, the soft rustle of fabric betraying discomfort. The Admiral's expression hardened into something unreadable, his eyes fixed now on the open folder, then on Steve. Jordan closed the folder and held it between them like a sealed verdict. Steve Hill stood frozen. The intimidation tactic evaporated, replaced by something smaller, tighter. His shoulders sagged a fraction, sweat darkened the fabric beneath his collar. The man who had filled the room minutes ago now struggled to occupy his own skin. Jordan didn't step back. She didn't need to. Steve moved without thinking. The motion was abrupt, instinctive, driven by a surge of panic that bypassed discipline entirely. His hand shot forward, fingers spread, reaching for the manila folder as if proximity alone could undo what it contained. The gesture was clumsy, telegraphed a man reacting, not commanding. Jordan was already gone. She pivoted on the ball of her foot and slid half a step to the side, the movement smooth and economical, muscle memory honed under far less forgiving conditions. Steve's hand cut through empty air, momentum carrying him forward just enough to force a corrective step. His balance faltered for a fraction of a second, long enough, the room saw it. A ripple passed through the audience, silent but unmistakable. Shoulders shifted, eyes widened. Someone in the third row exhaled sharply through parted lips. The image had inverted itself with brutal clarity. The decorated commander grasping at nothing, the woman he dismissed standing perfectly still, folder secured against her chest. Steve straightened too quickly, overcompensating. His face flushed, then drained again. The tick near his eye flared, rapid now, uncontrollable. He looked not commanding, not authoritative but exposed, unhinged. The silence thickened. Jordan turned to face the room fully. She didn't raise the folder. She didn't brandish it. She simply held it, relaxed but secure, like a weapon that didn't need to be fired to be understood. "You denied me a handshake," she said. Her voice carried without effort, cutting cleanly through the stillness, reaching the back wall with clarity. Steve's shoulders stiffened at the sound of it. "Because you thought I was nobody." A faint tightening appeared at the corners of her mouth, not anger, not satisfaction, recognition. "You judged me by my jacket," she continued, "the same way you judged that village by saplight photos and a rushed Tintel packet." Steve's jaw worked once, grinding his teeth. His hands curled at his sides, nails biting into his palms. "You don't look for the truth, Steve," Jordan said, her eyes never leaving his. "You look for the glory." The words landed heavier than any accusation shouted in anger. They were measured, certain, final. She broke eye contact then, turning toward the front row. The Admiral had risen from his seat. He stood with deliberate calm, posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back. His expression was carved into something severe and controlled, the kind reserved for moments when careers ended and inquiries began. His gaze moved briefly from Jordan to Steve, then settled back on her, assessing. "Admiral," Jordan said. Her tone shifted, formal now, procedural. "I am formally invoking Article 134, she continued, enunciating each number with care, conduct unbecoming an officer. And Article 107, false official statements. A murmur threatened to surface, then died as quickly as it began. The audio logs from his headset during Operation Obsidian were not lost, she added. Steve inhaled sharply, his chest rose, then stalled, breath trapped halfway in. His eyes snapped toward her, widening out, raw disbelief breaking through whatever composure remained. "I kept a backup." The Admiral's gaze sharpened. One of his aides shifted subtly closer, already anticipating orders not yet spoken. Steve Hills stood frozen at center stage, his metal suddenly too loud in the silence, the faint clink of metal against fabric marking each shallow breath. The man who had filled the room with certainty minutes earlier now looked small beneath the weight of his own record. The balance had shifted, irreversibly. Steve Hills didn't move. For a fraction of a second, his body seemed to forget how. The nose of the room faded to a dull pressure in his ears, replaced by a single, repeating thought that struck like a malfunctioning alarm. The backup. His eyes flicked involuntarily toward the folder in Jordan's hands, then away again, as if looking at it too long might make it real. His mouth opened, closed, the skin along his neck tightened, cords standing out beneath the color of his dressed whites. He had burned the servers. He remembered the smell of overheated plastic, the hum dropping to silence. He had personally ordered the drives crushed, watched them disappear into classified disposal. He had been thorough, meticulous. How? The word never fully formed. "That's impossible," he said instead. The sound came out raw and thin, fractured. His voice cracked on the last syllable, betraying him in a way no enemy ever had. I wiped the system." The moment the words left his mouth, something shifted. It wasn't loud. There was no collective gasp. Just a subtle, irreversible change in the air, like pressure equalizing after a sealed door opens. Steve's eyes widened as realization caught up to speech. His lips parted again, but this time nothing followed. His chest rose sharply, then stalled, breath held as if his body were bracing for impact. He had said it out loud, not in an interrogation room, not behind closed doors, but here under lights, before admirals, senators, aides, uniformed officers, and the quiet presence of press he had barely registered until now. The admission sat between them, exposed and undeniable. Tampering with evidence, obstruction, conscious guilt. Jordan didn't react. She didn't need to. In the front row, the Admiral rose. He moved with deliberate control, the way men did when every step carried institutional weight. His shoes made no sound as he crossed the short distance to the edge of the stage. His expression was set, severe, stripped of ceremony. He did not look at Steve Hills, not once. His attention was fixed on Jordan Lauren. "Chief Warrant Officer Lauren," he said. His voice was calm, even, but it carried authority that did not require amplification. He extended his hand toward her. The gesture was precise, formal, the same gesture Steve had denied her minutes earlier without a second thought. "Please," the Admiral continued, "give me the file." Jordan shifted the folder from one hand to the other and stepped forward. She placed it into his outstretched palm with care, ensuring full transfer before releasing it. Their hands brushed briefly, professional, steady, no hesitation, no spectacle. The Admiral turned away from her and opened the folder. Taper whispered softly as he flipped the cover back. His eyes moved across the first page, then stilled. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He turned the page, then another. With each line he read, the warmth drained from his face, replaced by a hard, controlled stillness that officers under his command knew well. When he finally looked up, it was at Steve. The disgust was unfiltered. "Commander Hills," the Admiral said. Steve straightened instinctively, years of conditioning forcing posture even as his hands trembled at his sides. A bead of sweat slid down his spine beneath the uniform. His metals caught the light as he moved, suddenly ostentatious, almost obscene. "You are relieved of duty," the Admiral continued, his tone clipped, procedural, effective immediately. Steve's throat worked, no sound came out. "Master-at-Arms," the Admiral said without turning his head. "Escort Commander Hills to the brig. He will be held pending a full JAG inquiry." The MPS stepped forward at once. They did not hesitate this time. The fall was absolute, and it unfolded without ceremony. Two Master-at-Arms stepped onto the stage with measured, practiced strides. Large men, shoulders squared, expressions carved from regulation discipline, they moved with the quiet efficiency of personnel executing a lawful order. No salute was rendered, no acknowledgement of rank remained. One took Steve by the left elbow, fingers closing just tight enough to assert control. The other mirrored the grip on his right. The contact was firm, impersonal, final. Steve's body reacted before his mind did. His shoulders stiffened. A shallow breath caught halfway in his chest. The faint tick at the corner of his right eye betrayed what his spine tried to deny. The metals pinned to his dress uniform chimed softly as he shifted his weight, metal tapping metal in a sound that echoed far louder in the silent hall than it ever had on a parade field. Once, that sound had meant honor. Now it rang hollow, like loose change shaken in an empty pocket. He tried to speak, his mouth opened, then closed again. When words finally forced their way out, they fractured under pressure. He turned his head toward the first row of dignitaries, senators, advisors, men and women who had shaken his hand when cameras were rolling. None met his eyes. One adjusted his cufflinks with sudden interest. Another stared intently at a darkened phone screen. A third bent forward slightly, studying the polished floor as if a flaw in the marble demanded immediate attention. Distance was being created in real time. Invisible but unmistakable, the Master-at-Arms guided him forward. Steve resisted for half a step, heels scraping against the stage, then thought better of it. The resistance drained out of him, replaced by something colder. As they passed Jordan, his movement slow, his head turned despite himself. He looked at her, not the file in her hands, not the uniform she wore. He looked at her face, at the stillness in her jaw, at the way her eyes didn't chase him, didn't flinch, didn't burn with triumph. There was no satisfaction there, no vengeance, only control. His voice dropped, stripped of rank and bluster, reduced to something small and private. "Why?" he whispered. The word barely carried past his own lips. It was years ago. Jordan met his gaze then. Her expression remained composed, almost clinical. If there was emotion beneath it, it was locked down behind years of discipline. Her breathing was steady. One hand rested loosely at her side, fingers relaxed, not clenched. When she spoke, her tone was low, even, precise. "Because the breacher you got killed was my husband," she said. Each word landed clean, without emphasis, "and you didn't even remember my name when you refused my hand." Steve's face drained of what little color remained, his mouth parting, but no sound followed. The sentence struck with the efficiency of a controlled detonation. No excess force, no spectacle, just complete structural failure. His eyes flickered, searching her face for something to argue against, something to undermine. There was nothing. The Master-at-Arms tightened their grips, a subtle signal that the moment was over. Steve's gaze broke, his shoulders slumped a fraction, as if a load he'd carried unknowingly had finally crushed him under its weight. The metals chimed once more as he was turned toward the exit. Jordan watched until he was gone. She didn't follow him with her eyes. She didn't straighten in victory. She simply stood where she was, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, holding the line she had held for years. The doors closed behind him with a muted, final sound. The doors closed behind Steve Hills with a muted, mechanical finality. The sound didn't echo, yet it seemed to seal something shut inside the auditorium. What remained was silence, dense, deliberate, scrubbed clean of tension. It wasn't awkward, it was corrective. The kind that follows a successful extraction, when the contaminant has been removed and the system is finally allowed to stabilize. Jordan stood where she was, shoulders squared, spine aligned by habit rather than emotion. She reached up and adjusted her jacket at the collar, smoothing a crease that hadn't been there before. The motion was small, almost instinctive, but it released something lodged deep beneath her sternum. Her breathing slowed by a fraction. The pressure she had carried for 7 years, every briefing attended, every hallway passed, every name spoken without his eased its grip, not gone, but lighter. The Admiral turned back to the microphone, his hand resting briefly on the podium as if grounding himself. His jaw tightened once, then relaxed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, carrying the authority of decades in uniform, "there will be no ceremony today. No qualifiers, no explanation, just an order, issued with finality." He stepped down from the stage, shoes striking the floor with measured precision, and stopped in front of Jordan. The proximity shifted the room's focus instantly. Cameras lowered, pens paused midair. The Admiral's eyes searched her face, not as an officer inspecting a subordinate, but as a man acknowledging another who had paid the cost. "I served with your husband," he said quietly. The words were not amplified, they weren't meant for the room. His voice dropped just enough to strip them of formality. He was a good man. Jordan's lips pressed together, not to suppress emotion, but to hold it in alignment. Her eyes didn't glisten, her chin didn't tremble. Only the slightest tightening at the corner of her mouth betrayed the impact. She inhaled through her nose, controlled, deliberate. "And you," the Admiral continued, his gaze unwavering, "you have done the Navy a great service today." He extended his hand. The gesture hung there, suspended in a space that felt heavier than any courtroom pause. The room leaned forward as one organism, breaths were held. Someone in the back shifted their weight, then froze. This time, no one looked away. Jordan didn't rush it. Her eyes flicked once to the Admiral's hand, then back to his face. She reached out and took it. The shake was firm, professional, exactly 3 controlled pumps before release. No hesitation, no flourish, just acknowledgement between equals. She turned without ceremony and began walking down the center aisle. Her steps were even, unhurried. The polished floor reflected the overhead lights beneath her boots as she passed rows of seated officials and officers. Some watched her opally now, others didn't. She didn't meet their eyes. She didn't need to. The file had spoken, the truth had stood on its own. There was no applause, none was necessary. The exit doors opened, and some light spilled in, sharp and unforgiving. Jordan crossed the threshold and stepped into the bright California sun. The air hit her face warm, salted, alive. She stopped just outside, lifted her chin, and drew a deep breath into her lungs. The smell of the ocean cut through everything else. For the first time in years, her shoulders dropped, her mouth curved, just slightly. A real smile, unforced, earned. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Stories like this only surface and they're remembered and shared.